They called her the beast in the sack, but the cowboy found his heart inside it. Jake was a man who had always preferred the quiet of the open ranch to the busy, crowded streets of town. His days were filled with the rhythmic tasks of caring for his cattle and working the fields. He liked his life simple. No drama, no distractions, just the steady hum of nature. At 32, he'd lived a good life, but it was a lonely one. While the town around him bustled with gossip and the occasional flirtation, Jake kept to himself, focusing on his work and rarely venturing into town unless he had to. But that all changed when Lena came to town. She wasn't the kind of woman Jake was used to seeing around. She didn't walk with the same delicate, careful steps that most women did, trying to fit into the expected mold of the town's ladies. No, Lena was different. She was bold. She walked like she owned the place, with her head held high, eyes sharp and unafraid. Her long, dark hair framed a face that carried both confidence and mystery. The first time Jake saw her was at the saloon one warm summer evening. It was the usual gathering spot for the town's workers, ranchers, and farmers, where they came to unwind after a long day of hard work. But when Lena walked in, she seemed to command the attention of every man in the room. The moment she stepped through the door, the conversations dropped and all eyes turned to her. She wasn't dressed in the modest, flowing dresses that most women wore around here. She wore something bolder, more daring, something that drew attention. Jake didn't know why, but he found himself staring. He wasn't the type to get caught up in the gossip or the stories that were already circulating about her. Still, he couldn't help but listen to the whispers that followed her wherever she went. They called her the beast in the sack, a phrase Jake had heard 100 times but didn't fully understand. It seemed to be an exaggeration, maybe even a way to push her away. But no matter what the town said, there was something about her that intrigued him. She sat at the bar, looking completely unfazed by the attention. Jake had heard the rumors. Many men had tried to win her over, only to be discarded when they failed to keep up with her boldness. She was independent, carefree, and unapologetically herself. But behind the loudness, behind the whispers and the rumors, Jake couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to her than anyone realized. As the night went on, Jake found himself watching her from across the room. She wasn't the type to shy away from a challenge, and when a few of the local men approached her, she seemed to handle them with ease. Each word, each glance, like she had them figured out, long before they even spoke to her. She was confident in a way that most women around here weren't. And yet, Jake couldn't help but wonder, was it real confidence, or was it a mask? The night wore on, and after a few drinks, the conversation turned toward Lena. The men spoke of her like she was some kind of wild creature, a woman who could never be tamed. Some claimed to have had a night with her, others said they'd been shut down before they could even get close. But every single one of them agreed on one thing. Jake wasn't sure what to think. The stories all seemed so exaggerated. The way the men talked about her made her sound like something to fear, someone who didn't fit in with the normal order of things. But Jake had always been someone who looked beyond appearances. He wanted to know the real story, and maybe, just maybe, he wanted to know the woman behind the rumors. His chance came sooner than he expected. Lena didn't leave the saloon until late, and when she did, she walked alone, her boots clicking against the wooden floor. The night air was cool, the stars bright above. Jake, deciding he couldn't just sit there and wonder, followed her outside. He wasn't sure what he expected, but he knew he couldn't let this chance slip by. As he stepped out of the saloon, he saw her standing by the hitching post, her back turned to him. "Excuse me, miss," Jake called out, unsure of what to say but feeling an undeniable pull to speak to her. Lena turned slowly, her eyes meeting his with a steady gaze. There was no surprise in her expression, no hint of defensiveness. She knew he had been watching her. "You've been watching me all night, haven't you?" she asked, her voice soft but firm, with a hint of amusement. Jake took a step closer, scratching his head. "Maybe. But I'm not one for gossip, miss. I'd rather get to know the person before I listen to what everyone else has to say." Lena raised an eyebrow, a smirk tugging at the corner of her lips. "And what do you think of what you've seen so far?" she asked. Jake thought for a moment. "I think there's more to you than anyone around here realizes. I think you've got a lot of layers, and I'm curious about them." Lena let out a soft laugh. "You sure you're ready for them?" Jake didn't answer right away. He just looked at her. Really looked at her. There was a fire in her eyes, something that both excited and intimidated him. She wasn't like the other women in town. She wasn't trying to hide behind some perfect image or soft-spoken demeanor. She was who she was. And if anyone didn't like it, that was their problem. "I'm ready," he said finally, his voice steady. Lena studied him for a moment before she nodded. "All right then, cowboy. If you're so sure about that, let's see what happens next." The words hung in the air between them, unspoken but understood. There was something about this woman that made him want to break free from his usual quiet life. Maybe it was her confidence, or maybe it was the way she carried herself with such certainty. Whatever it was, Jake knew one thing for sure. This wasn't going to be the last time he crossed paths with Lena. And despite the rumors and the talk of the town, he couldn't help but feel a spark of excitement about what was to come. The days that followed that night at the saloon were strange for Jake. He couldn't stop thinking about Lena. The way she looked at him, like she could see right through him, lingered in his mind. He'd always prided himself on being the type of man who kept his emotions under control. But Lena, with her boldness and confidence, had somehow cracked that armor. He'd never been one to chase after women, and yet something about Lena drew him in. Maybe it was her mystery, or maybe it was the challenge she presented. She wasn't like the women he had known, those who whispered behind their fans and waited to be asked out. Lena wasn't interested in games. She made her own rules, and she expected everyone else to follow them, whether they liked it or not. Jake wasn't sure what to make of it. He wasn't used to women like her, but there was something intriguing about her raw honesty. She didn't pretend to be anything she wasn't, and for that, Jake found himself respecting her in a way he hadn't expected. But respect wasn't the only thing he felt. The next time he saw her was at the local general store. He'd gone in to buy supplies for the ranch, but when he stepped through the door, there she was, picking out a bundle of fresh herbs from the shelf. She didn't seem to notice him at first, her back turned as she carefully selected what she needed. Jake hesitated for a moment, unsure whether he should approach her. He could feel the tension between them from the night before, and part of him wondered if she even wanted to see him again. But another part of him, the part that had always been curious, wanted to get to know the real Lena. Taking a deep breath, he walked over to her. "Need help with anything?" he asked, his voice casual. Lena turned around with a surprised look, but then she smiled. "Jake, right?" she asked, her tone soft yet steady. "That's me," he replied, nodding. "Didn't expect to see you here." She shrugged. "I come here every week. Just because I don't talk to everyone doesn't mean I don't shop like everyone else." She said it with a kind of quiet confidence, as though she was fully aware of the way people viewed her, but didn't care in the slightest. Jake laughed softly. "I get that. I don't come into town much myself." They stood there for a moment, a comfortable silence hanging between them. Jake wasn't sure what to say next, but he didn't want to leave just yet. Something about her made him want to learn more. "You sure have a lot of people talking about you," Jake said, breaking the silence. His words were careful, like he didn't want to upset her, but he felt it needed to be said. Lena raised an eyebrow, but her expression remained calm. "Yeah, I've heard." Jake couldn't help but notice the way she said it, almost like she was used to it, like it didn't affect her anymore. But he could see the glint in her eyes, the way she held herself. There was a quiet strength in her, something that told Jake she wasn't the kind of woman who would let anyone's words bring her down. "They say a lot of things, don't they?" Jake continued. "Don't think anyone really knows the real you." Lena's gaze softened, but her voice remained steady. "You'd be surprised how little that bothers me. People talk. It's what they do. I don't care about rumors." Jake didn't know what made him ask next, but the question slipped out before he could stop it. "Then why don't you just leave? If they're all talking about you behind your back, why stay?" Lena looked at him for a long moment, her expression unreadable. For a second, Jake regretted the question. Maybe it was too personal. Maybe he'd crossed a line. But then she spoke, her voice low and sincere. "Because I'm not running from them. I'm not running from anyone. I've made my choices, and I've learned to live with them. I'm not going to let anyone's opinion of me change that." Jake was taken aback. There was a depth to her words, a weight that made him realize just how much she had been through. She wasn't just the bold, confident woman he had seen at the saloon. She was someone who had fought for her place in the world, who had learned to stand tall despite the weight of other people's judgments. Jake found himself respecting her even more. He had always admired strength in people, but he hadn't expected to find it in Lena. It wasn't the kind of strength that came from physical toughness or loud words. It was the strength that came from living through hardship and still walking with your head held high. They continued to talk as Lena finished picking out her herbs. Jake found himself asking questions, learning more about her than he had expected. She told him about her family, about how she had grown up in a place where people weren't kind to outsiders, about how she had learned to rely on herself when no one else would. It wasn't a sob story, though. It was just the truth, simple and matter-of-fact, without a hint of self-pity. By the time they reached the counter to pay, Jake felt like he understood her a little better, but he knew there was still a lot more to learn. And he was starting to think he wanted to. "Maybe I'll see you around again," Jake said, his voice a little less uncertain than before. Lena nodded as she took her bags. "Maybe," she said with a smile. "If you're lucky." Jake couldn't help but smile back. For the first time since meeting her, he felt like they were on the same page. He wasn't sure where things would go between them, but he knew one thing for certain. He was no longer just curious about Lena. He was starting to like her. Not because of what anyone else had said, but because of who she really was. As Jake watched her walk out of the store, he felt something shift inside him. He wasn't sure if it was the beginning of something new or just a fleeting moment, but he knew he couldn't stop thinking about her. And for the first time in a long time, Jake wasn't sure if he wanted to. After their conversation at the store, Jake couldn't get Lena off his mind. She seemed to occupy every moment of his thoughts, her words echoing in his head like a song he couldn't stop humming. He couldn't understand it. He had only spoken to her a handful of times, but he felt like he knew her already. There was something about her honesty, her strength, that kept drawing him in. She wasn't like the other women he'd known. Lena was different. Bold, unapologetic, and somehow more real than anyone else in town. Jake had always prided himself on being a man who kept to himself. He didn't get involved in other people's business, especially when it came to matters of the heart. But with Lena, He felt something stir inside him that he hadn't felt in a long time. It was more than just attraction. It was respect, admiration, something deeper than just the passing glances or casual flirtations he was used to. It had been a week since they'd talked in the store, and Jake found himself hoping that their next encounter would be soon. He didn't want to seem desperate, but the thought of seeing her again had a magnetic pull on him that he couldn't explain. He had always been a man of few words, but with Lena, he felt like he could talk for hours. Jake's life continued as usual. Long days at the ranch, working the land and tending to the cattle. But in the quiet moments, when the sun was setting and he had time to think, his mind would wander back to her. He remembered her smile, the way her eyes sparkled when she spoke of her past. There was a lightness to her that contrasted with the weight of everything she'd been through. The next time Jake saw Lena was unexpected. He was out on the ranch, riding his horse across the open fields when he saw her, standing by the fence that lined the property. At first, he thought he was imagining things. Why would she be here? The nearest town was miles away, and he hadn't expected to see her out here. But as he got closer, he realized it was really her. Lena was standing there, looking out across the fields as if she belonged there. Jake pulled his horse to a stop and waved. "What are you doing out here?" he called out, a grin tugging at the corners of his lips. Lena turned and smiled at him. "Just thought I'd take a walk. The view's nice out here." Jake dismounted and walked over to the fence, leaning on it next to her. "It sure is. Not many folks come this far out. It's peaceful out here." Lena nodded, her gaze still fixed on the wide expanse of the land. "It's different from the noise in town. I like the quiet." Jake was surprised. He had thought she would be more of a city person, someone who thrived on the bustle and excitement of the town. But here she was, enjoying the solitude of the ranch, just like him. "I didn't think you'd come out here," Jake said, still leaning on the fence. "I figured you'd rather be with the rest of the town folks." Lena looked at him, her expression softening. "I don't really fit in there. People like to talk, and I've learned to ignore them. But out here, it's just me. No one judging me, no one gossiping. It's peaceful." Jake could tell that her words held more weight than she was letting on. There was a sadness in her voice, a vulnerability that she rarely showed. He had seen the confident, strong woman in the saloon, and he had heard the rumors about her. But this was different. This was the side of Lena that most people didn't see. The woman who had been through more than her share of pain, yet still stood tall.
"You don't have to prove anything to anyone," Jake said quietly, his voice low.
"You're not what they say you are. You're not some story that people tell. You're a person, just like everyone else." Lena looked at him for a long moment, as though weighing his words. Then she nodded slowly. "I've learned to accept it. People will always talk, and I can't control that. All I can do is be myself." Jake felt a surge of respect for her. He knew that it wasn't easy for her to be so open, especially in a place where people judged her for every move she made. But there was something about Lena's honesty, her willingness to face the world with her flaws and strengths on display, that made her even more beautiful in his eyes. They stood there for a while, just looking out at the land in silence. The sun was beginning to set, casting a golden light across the fields. It was a peaceful moment, one that Jake wanted to hold on to. There was something special about the way Lena seemed to connect with the world around her. It wasn't the same as the small-town women who hid behind their smiles and whispered in the shadows. Lena was raw, unfiltered, and real. "I've got to get going," Lena said after a while, breaking the silence. "It's getting late." Jake didn't want her to leave, but he knew she had to. "I'll walk you back to your car." he said, turning to his horse. But Lena stopped him. No need. I can manage, but thanks for letting me stay for a while. Jake nodded. Any time. You're always welcome here. As Lena walked back toward the road, Jake watched her go. He didn't know what the future held, but he knew one thing. He was glad she had come into his life. She had turned his world upside down in the best possible way. Later that evening, as Jake sat down for his dinner, his mind wandered back to Lena. He couldn't help but feel that he was beginning to see her for who she truly was. Not the woman the town had painted her to be, but a woman with her own story, her own pain, and her own strength. She wasn't just the wild, untamed woman everyone talked about. She was someone who had fought for everything she had, and someone who wasn't afraid to stand on her own 2 feet. And Jake admired that more than he could put into words. As he finished his meal, he couldn't shake the feeling that something was starting to blossom between them. He wasn't sure what it was yet, but he knew that the more he got to know Lena, the more he realized that she had a place in his life. Jake wasn't one for grand gestures or sweeping declarations, but with Lena, he felt like maybe, just maybe, he was ready to take the chance. The weeks that followed felt like a whirlwind to Jake. He found himself thinking about Lena more and more. It wasn't just her beauty or the way she carried herself. It was the way she made him feel, alive, present, and truly seen. Every conversation they had, whether it was brief or long, seemed to peel away another layer of the mystery that was Lena. And the more he learned, the more he realized how little the people in town really knew about her. Jake had been careful to keep his distance from the gossip that swirled around Lena. The town spoke in whispers. Men who had tried and failed to win her over, women who judged her for the choices she made, and everyone else who couldn't resist the temptation to speculate. But Jake didn't care about any of that. He was beginning to see Lena for who she really was. Someone who had fought against the world and come out stronger. Someone who had lived a life that wasn't always kind, but who still managed to stand tall with her head held high. The truth was, Jake had been hiding his own feelings from Lena. He didn't know how to say it, didn't know how to express what was growing inside him. But it wasn't just about attraction anymore. It wasn't just about the way she looked or the way her eyes lit up when she spoke about something she cared about. It was deeper than that. It was the way she made him feel understood, like he wasn't just another face in the crowd. It was the way she saw the world, raw, unfiltered, and unapologetically real. Jake had always been a man of few words, someone who kept his emotions to himself. But with Lena, it felt like he could talk about anything. She made him feel comfortable, like he didn't have to hide who he was, like he could just be Jake, the rancher, without any pretenses. And yet, every time he tried to take a step closer to her, he felt the weight of the town's judgment pressing down on him. He knew people were watching, waiting for him to make a mistake, waiting to see if he would fall victim to Lena's reputation, too. The pressure was there, even though he didn't let it show. Lena, on the other hand, didn't seem to care about what anyone thought. She lived her life by her own rules, and that was something Jake admired. But he also saw the loneliness in her eyes when the crowds weren't around, when the masks came off and the world got quiet. He could see how much she longed for connection, for someone who would see her for who she truly was, not just as the woman the town had made her out to be. One evening, Jake found himself out at the local bar, having a drink with some of the other ranchers. The conversation was light, filled with small talk about cattle prices and weather, but Jake's mind was elsewhere. He was thinking about Lena. He had seen her earlier in the day walking along the dirt road near the edge of town. She looked peaceful, lost in thought, her posture relaxed but her expression distant. Jake couldn't help but wonder what was going through her mind. He knew that she carried more than her share of burdens, and sometimes it felt like she was still trying to figure out where she fit in the world. The weight of the past seemed to hang on her, even when she smiled or laughed. It was like she was holding on to something, trying not to let it slip away, but it was clear that it had a hold on her. The bar was quieting down for the night when Jake decided he couldn't wait any longer. He stood up, excused himself from the table, and walked out into the cool evening air. He needed to see her. He didn't know what he would say, but he knew he couldn't leave things unsaid. He had spent too much time in his head, doubting, wondering if he should take the leap. But tonight, he was done with hesitation. He found her walking along the road just as he had seen her earlier, but this time she wasn't as distant. She looked up when she heard him approach, her eyes lighting up with a mix of surprise and something softer. "Jake," she said, a small smile tugging at her lips. "What are you doing out here?" "I could ask you the same thing," he said, stopping in front of her. Lena shrugged, her eyes never leaving his. "I was just thinking, I guess. Needed some time to myself." Jake nodded. He could understand that. The world was loud, and sometimes it was hard to escape all the noise. He looked around, the quiet of the evening settling around them. "I've been thinking too," Jake said, his voice steady but filled with emotion. "About everything. About you." Lena tilted her head slightly, studying him. "What about me?" she asked, her voice soft but curious. Jake took a deep breath. He hadn't expected this to be easy, but he knew it was time. "I don't care what people say about you. I don't care about the rumors or the whispers or any of that. What matters to me is who you are. The real you. Not the version everyone talks about. I see you, Lena. I see the person you are inside." Lena's expression softened. For a moment, Jake could see the walls around her crack just a little bit, the vulnerability slipping through. "I know what people say," she said, her voice quiet now. "I've heard it all, and sometimes it gets to me. Sometimes I wonder if they're right. If I really am what they say." Jake shook his head, stepping closer to her. "You're not. You're more than that. You're someone who's been through a lot, but you're still here, still standing. That's something most people can't say." Lena looked at him, her eyes searching his face. It felt like she was looking for something, some kind of sign that he wasn't just saying the words to make her feel better, that he truly meant what he said. "I care about you, Lena," Jake continued, his voice steady but filled with feeling. "I care about you more than I've let on. And I think I'm ready to stop pretending I don't feel it." Lena blinked, her eyes wide with surprise, but there was something else there too. A softness, a warmth that hadn't been there before. "Jake," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I don't know what to say." Jake reached out, gently taking her hand. "You don't have to say anything. I just needed you to know. I'm not going anywhere. Not this time." Lena's gaze softened even more, and she squeezed his hand. It was a simple gesture, but it spoke volumes. In that moment, Jake knew that this was just the beginning. They weren't done yet.